Now the important thing is hemolytic anemia, right? So whenever we are seeing hemolytic anemia, we have to decide what kind of hemolytic anemia we are seeing, intravascular or extravascular. So whatever is happening within the blood vessel, that will be called as intravascular. So hemolysis within the blood vessel is called as intravascular. So this is number one, right? And when it is outside the blood vessel, hemolysis outside the blood vessel, so where in spleen, liver, or even the bone marrow also, right? So this will be called as extravascular hemolysis, right? So I understood there are two types of hemolysis. One within the blood vessel, intravascular. Within the blood vessel, intravascular. Outside the blood vessel, extravascular. So where outside is spleen, liver, and bone marrow, right? Intravascular hemolysis, you will be having numerous findings, right? So there are so many findings which I will discuss later on. First, I would like to finish off this extravascular hemolysis, right? So what will be present in extravascular hemolysis? What are the basic findings you will see here? The basic finding I'm writing. I'm not writing everything. The important one. See this. When RBC will lyse, what will come out? Heme. Heme will form bilirubin. Bilirubin will form bilirubin, right? So what we are going to see? What kind of bilirubin in hemolytic anemia you are going to see? Conjugated or unconjugated? Because hemolysis is more and conjugating enzyme in the liver is less. So obviously conjugation will be less, right? So it will be unconjugated. So always remember there is an increase.
बनती हो तो you can comment only live class तो कोई कमेंट कैसी जा
रिकॉर्ड हो रहा है
Unconjugated bilirubin. Right, so there is an increased unconjugated bilirubin in this case. Right, so increased unconjugated bilirubin will be here. Second important thing which I wanted to say that haptoglobin is a compound, it's a protein synthesized by liver. As you can see the name haptoglobin. Name itself is telling haptoglobin. Haptoglobin. So haptoglobin is a protein which will combine with hemoglobin and then they will transport them for the removal via macrophage monocyte system. Right. So this will be also decreased. This will be also decreased in case of the unconjugated. But remember, this decrease is very mild. That is the point we have to understand because I'm just writing same thing here also. When we are going to see the haptoglobin level will be moderate to severe decrease in case of intravascular hemolysis. So this is the important point which I wanted to tell you, right? So haptoglobin is decreased in both of them, right? Because some of the FMG guide will be saying that haptoglobin is normal, right? So haptoglobin is never normal, right? Haptoglobin will be decreased in both of them. Only difference is in extravascular hemolysis because it is extravascular, right? But they also have monocyte macrophage, spleen, liver. So there will be decrease. But here there is concentration of monocyte macrophages more in the blood, right? So that is why there will be moderate to severe decrease in the haptoglobin level, right? Here. So now you understood this point. So that unconjugated bilirubin will be there and haptoglobin will be decreased in case of extravascular hemolysis, right? Now we will focus on what are the findings we are going to see in the intravascular hemolysis. See this. Within the blood vessel, what is going to happen? First of all, we will see RBC lysis. RBC, if it is lysed, what will be released from the RBC? Just now I have told you, heme will be released, right? Heme will be released and heme will be converted into unconjugated or indirect bilirubin. So this is number one finding. Can you see? This is the number one finding. So what we are seeing that in intravascular hemolysis, RBC will be damaged. RBC will release heme, right? Because they are consisting of heme, and that heme will be converted into bilirubin, and that will be unconjugated or indirect bilirubin. Another important thing you have to understand: RBC is rich in LDH enzyme, right? So whenever RBC is getting damaged, whenever RBC is getting ruptured, then they will release LDH also into the serum, and that is why serum LDH level will be high. Intravascular hemolysis, serum LDH level will be high. That is all these findings are not seen in the extravascular, right? Intravascular, extravascular both will be sharing this point, right? Indirect bilirubin, right? But serum LDH will be seen only in case of the intravascular hemolysis. Clear? Right? So when RBC will damage, what are the things they will release? One is the heme, second is the LDH, and third is the hemoglobin, right? Heme, LDH, hemoglobin. There are three compounds they are going to release: heme, LDH, and hemoglobin. So whenever hemoglobin is coming outside, always remember when hemoglobin is within the RBC, they're not toxic. Within the RBC, they're not toxic. But once they have been damaged and they're coming into the blood, they become toxic. And this condition is called as increased hemoglobin in the blood is called as hemoglobinemia. Right? That is separate hemoglobin. We're not talking about the RBC hemoglobin. We're talking about the fragmented hemoglobin, means which has been released from the RBC. So this is called as hemoglobinemia. So this hemoglobinemia is not good for our health, right? It is not good because this is a toxin. So it has to be removed. Who will remove? Kidney. Kidney will remove them. So when kidney is removing, so what is that called as hemoglobinuria? What is this called as? Hemoglobin is removed in the urine. Hemoglobin in the urine is called hemoglobinuria, right? So what I said, toxic hemoglobin has been removed through the kidney, and this is called as hemoglobinuria when they are removed as it is. Number one point. But sometime what will happen? This hemoglobin will be degraded by the renal tubule, right? So renal tubule degradation will convert them into hemosiderin. And now this hemosiderin will be removed. In the urine, and that is called as hemosideриnuria. So now you can see both things are going hand in hand, right? Understood? RBC lysis, hemoglobin, the toxin, will be removed by kidney as a hemoglobinuria. By urine, or some of the hemoglobin will be degraded in the renal tubule to form the hemosiderin, right? And this is called as hemosideриnuria. Understood? Hemoglobinuria, these are exclusive finding of the intravascular hemolysis. Now you understood why I was telling you these are the findings you will see only in the intravascular hemolysis, right? So hemoglobinuria, hemosideриnuria, these are findings of the intravascular hemolysis, right? Now another important thing you can see that, as I said, that hemoglobin is cancerous, toxin. So one mechanism to remove them from the kidney, and second mechanism to get them oxidized. So now you can see that this toxic hemoglobin is now getting oxidized to form the methemoglobin. Right? So now the excess hemoglobin which has come into the blood, they have been oxidized to form methemoglobin, and this condition is called as methemoglobinemia. Right? So whatever methemoglobin is the non-toxic form. So here I just write this hemoglobin is toxic, right? And now methemoglobin is non-toxic form. Right? So now you can see that non-toxic form has been created. Non-toxic form has been created by our blood by doing the oxidation. By oxidation, non-toxic methemoglobin has been formed. So that is called as methemoglobinemia, right? Because they are excess in amount. And now this methemoglobin will be coming in the urine, and that is called as methemoglobinemia. Understood? So excess amount of hemoglobin, excess amount of methemoglobin, and excess amount of methemoglobin will come into the urine also, and that is called as methemoglobin. Clear? So that is how you will identify intravascular hemolysis. What are the findings you have seen so far? Indirect bilirubin increase, serum LDH, hemoglobinuria, hemocistinuria, hemoglobinemia, methemoglobinemia, and methemoglobinemia. Right. Now come to the last point. As I said, hemoglobin is toxic form, so some of them will be combining with the protein called haptoglobin. Right, haptoglobin. So what is haptoglobin? As I said, haptoglobin is a protein which is synthesized from the liver. Right. So these are the proteins synthesized by the liver. So liver will synthesize haptoglobin, and this haptoglobin will combine with hemoglobin, and now they are cleared by monocyte macrophage system, as I was telling, right? So when they are being cleared by monocyte macrophage system, so this haptoglobin is also given removed, right? So that is why when you are going to measure the serum haptoglobin level, that will be decreased, right? So now understood, these are the 8 findings, and out of these 8 findings, you can see this one and this one, right? These 2 findings are different. These 2 findings are only similar in the extravascular hemolysis. Is it clear to all of you? So now you can see that what are the exclusive findings which examiner asked? Intravascular hemolysis, I repeat. Indirect bilirubin is increased, right? That is fine. Serum LDH will be increased second. Hemoglobinuria, hemocistinuria, hemoglobinemia, methemoglobinemia, and they will be coming in urine, methemoglobinemia, and excess amount of hemoglobin will be combining with haptoglobin protein synthesized by liver, removed by monocyte macrophage system, and that is why serum haptoglobin is decreased, right? So now you understood here the serum haptoglobin decrease. Remember here the serum haptoglobin decrease will be moderate to severe. That is the point we have to remember. Suppose why I am saying this question, because if in case examiner asks you, because in older time they used to ask, right? Is serum haptoglobin is decreased in which of the following, extravascular or intravascular? Then what should be your answer? Serum haptoglobin is decreased in which of the following, intravascular hemolysis or extravascular hemolysis? So that time this will help you to solve this question, right? Severe or moderate is here, milder in the extravascular, right? Here, so now I understood intravascular, extravascular hemolysis. Fine. Now we will be moving on to the hemolytic anemia. So we will describe one by one hemolytic anemia. So number one hemolytic anemia which I am going to discuss is the hereditary spherocytosis. Hereditary spherocytosis. So what is hereditary spherocytosis? As you can see, the name itself is hereditary condition, right? Hereditary condition. So what kind of inheritance pattern you will see in genetics we have discussed? Hereditary dominant family. Remember? Hereditary dominant family, hereditary spherocytosis, right? So this is mostly autosomal dominant. So remember this point. Hereditary spherocytosis is the mostly autosomal dominant condition. And what is the problem? Problem is mutation, right? Mutation in which gene? Mutation in which gene? Can you tell me in the comment box? Mutation in the RBC membrane protein encoding genes, right? So I understood. RBC membrane protein encoding genes are having mutation. So which gene is having most common mutation? Can you tell me? Most common. Most common. Yes, very good. Ankyrin. Very nice. Ankyrin is the most common. So remember, ankyrin is the most common mutation, right? So this is number one. Ankyrin is the most common mutation, right? They will be having all other mutations also. They will be having spectrin mutation also, right? They will be having protein 4.1, protein 4.2, 4.1, 4.2, band 3, right? All these are having mutation, right? All these are having mutation. My question is, out of all the membrane protein, right? You can see all are written here, which is not associated with the pathogenesis of hereditary spherocytosis. Can you tell me in the comment box? Which of the following protein is not associated with? Which of the following is not associated with? No, band 3 is the third most common. So what I have not written here? Can you see what I have not written here? One protein which I have not written here is the glycophorin. So remember, this is the AIMS question. Glycophorin is not associated with hereditary spherocytosis. So that point you have to keep in your mind, right? So glycophorin is not associated with the hereditary spherocytosis. Clear? Which is not associated, glycophorin is not associated with hereditary spherocytosis. Right, this is number one question. Second question, which was asked in recently JIPMER exam, and this was neat question also in 2016-17, which is having association with the severity of the hereditary spherocytosis. Severity of the hereditary spherocytosis is best correlated with, right? So remember, this is a very good question which examiner is asking nowadays. Severity of the hereditary spherocytosis. Severity of hereditary spherocytosis is best correlated with spectrin mutation. Right, so now you understood. Severity of the hereditary spherocytosis is best correlated with the spectrin. That was the question. Okay, if I ask you a hemolysis of the hereditary spherocytosis is most commonly associated. Hemolysis. Which mutation? Hemolysis. Right, so always remember, this is how examiner is trying to fool us. Right, examiner will try to tell us how you are going to measure the severity. You are going to measure the severity by seeing the hemolysis. Right, so same thing. And how you are going to measure the hemolysis? How you are going to measure the hemolysis? By the osmotic fragility test. Osmotic fragility. Right, so now understood. These are the 3 different questions which examiner will try to ask you. Right, severity associated with, or hemolysis associated with, or osmotic fragility, and all 3 are same. Severity, hemolysis, osmotic fragility. See, severity we are going to assess by hemolysis. Hemolysis we are going to assess by osmotic fragility, and all 3 are associated with the spectrin mutation most commonly, most strongly. Now understood. So severity, all these things are associated with the mutation, that will be spectrin mutation. Clear? So now understood. Hereditary spherocytosis is autosomal dominant RBC membrane protein mutation disorder. So if you remember when I was telling you yesterday about the normal RBC and normal RBC membrane protein, what was their function? What was their function? Flexibility. Remember? Flexibility was their function. So if these are mutant, so what will happen to the flexibility of the RBC? What will happen to the flexibility of the RBC? Can you see this? If you remember yesterday what we have discussed, normal blood flow, normal faster blood flow, and normal RBC, when they are having blood flow fast, they will flex their body and they will survive. Right? They will survive this faster flow damage. But what happens when there is a membrane protein mutation? What happens when there is a membrane protein mutation? So because of this abnormality, now flexibility is lost. Now the flexibility is lost, and because of this loss of flexibility, when the faster blood flow will come, what will happen? There will be damage of the RBC membrane. Right? So there will be a membrane damage. Now you understood what I'm saying? I'm saying that because of the membrane protein mutation, there is a loss of flexibility. Right? And because of this loss of flexibility, now RBC membrane will be having damage. So that's what I'm showing you. RBC membrane is getting damaged. So if RBC membrane is getting damaged, so what will be the size of cell? RBC will be smaller or larger? Smaller. Right? RBC will become smaller, surface area will become smaller. And for a smaller surface area, what is the ideal volume? The sphere. So that is why they will change into the spherocyte. Understood? So now you can see what I'm showing you here, the RBC has become very small. Because of the membrane damage, now you can see RBC is getting a spherical shape and they are very small. And these small cells are called as spherocytes. Right? So tell me, first of all, we understood that spherocytes are smaller. So if examiner asks you, spherocytes are smaller than normal RBC or larger than normal RBC, what will be your answer? PGI question. Very good. So spherocytes are smaller. Spherocytes are smaller than normal RBC. This is the number one point. Now the second point. Examiner is asking you that spherocytes will be having central pallor. Yes or no? Smaller than RBC and no central pallor. Very good. There will be no central pallor. no central panel. Why? Because see this. If you look at this RBC, can you see this thin area which I marked? This is the thin area. Thin area is having low hemoglobin, and that is why they are not combining with GIMSA and they remain pale, right? Here, but here what is happening? Sphere hemoglobin distribution will be homogeneous throughout the surface. Here hemoglobin distribution was not uniform. It was having more hemoglobin at these places, and that is why there is a central panel. But here hemoglobin is having equal distribution throughout the surface of the RBC, and that is why there is no central panel. So this point will help you to identify spherocytes on peripheral blood examination. Right? They will be smaller than normal RBC, and they will be having no central panel. Now you understood why I was emphasizing yesterday. They will be of equal size. Normal RBC will be of equal size to the lymphocyte, 8 micron, 8 micron. Right? So now you understand that these are smaller when they will be smaller than the lymphocyte. Understood? And there will be no central panel because of spherical shape. Clear? So now what RBC has been found here, spherocyte. Right? They have two problems. Number one, they do not have normal protein. That is the reason for this development. And number two, they do not have flexibility. So whenever this RBC is going to come and they are going to get trapped inside the splenic sinusoid. So this is the splenic sinusoid. Splenic sinusoids, right? So when they're coming to the splenic sinusoids, can you see this? They have been trapped here. They have been trapped here inside the sinusoid. Now they cannot flex. If it would have been a normal RBC, this would have flexed and they have ejaculated from there, right? But now they have been trapped here. So when they are getting trapped here, so what will happen? Macrophage will come. Macrophage will come and they will take them out and then they will start destroying them in the spleen. So this is called extravascular hemolysis, splenic destruction of the spherocytes, right? So this is called extravascular hemolysis, right? So this is the pathogenesis of hereditary spherocytosis, right? So now understood, this is the pathogenesis of hereditary spherocytosis, right? So what is pathogenesis? RBC membrane protein mutation. There will be loss of flexibility of the RBC. Membrane will be damaged because of the faster blood flow, and then they will acquire the spherical shape, which is the smaller, no central panel, right? Sinusoids will be seen mostly in the red pulp. Then only they will be red now. Right. So splenic sinusoids, all these spherocytes will be coming and they will be trapped inside and then they will be taken up by macrophage and then they will be destroying them. So that is why we are saying that spleen is having extravascular hemolysis, right? Now my question is, in these patients, right? In these patients, what we will do the treatment? Because problem is, who is the main villain? Who is the main villain? Who is villain here? Spleen is the villain, right? Spleen is the villain in this case, right? So what we will do? We will cut down the spleen. Splenectomy is the treatment in these patients, right? Splenectomy is the treatment in these patients. So my question is, after splenectomy, so we have done splenectomy, right? So splenectomy is the treatment of these patients, right? Splenectomy is the treatment of hereditary spherocytosis patient, right? So there was a question in PGI exam. After splenectomy, will you find spherocytes in the peripheral blood? Yes, very good. That is the very, very important MCQ. Spherocytes will be still present in peripheral blood. That is the very important and very beautiful point. Why I said very beautiful point? Because see, the damage is done by spleen, but spherocyte formation is not by spleen. Spherocyte formation is a simple membrane protein mutation. So even though you remove the spleen, membrane protein mutation is still there, and that is why they will be having spherocyte in the peripheral blood. So even after splenectomy, spherocyte will be present in the peripheral blood. This was the statement in the PGI exam, right? So I understood. Basically, problem is the RBC membrane mutation, right? It is not the spleen. Spleen is the reason for the hemolysis. I understood. So that's clear, right? So here, that's what I said. Macrocytes will be bigger one. Spherocytes will be smaller one. Macrocytes. So that is what I'm saying. You have to identify normal RBC, and then you have to compare. They are very big, then they are macrocyte. If they are small, then you will be saying that is spherocyte. Both will be hypertrophic only. Both will be hypertrophic only. Yeah, after splenectomy, they will not be causing harm. But definitely, that spherocytic area will be smaller one. So obviously, the oxygen carrying capacity will be less. Harm will be not there, but there will be definitely some anemia symptoms will be there. The fatigability and all these things will be dyspnea that will be present. Right. Now coming to the another important thing. See, what I said that in this hereditary spherocytosis, spherocytes are formed. Spherocytes are also seen in PNH, G6PD, deficiency anemia. It is also seen in thalassemia also, right? So don't think that it is a very characteristic finding. Hereditary spherocytosis we are studying also, right? And autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So this was older BJ question also, right? So these are various conditions where spherocytes will be present, right? Spherocytes will be present. So now question examiner asked, spherocytes are most commonly seen in NEET question, AIMS question, PGI question. All exams they had asked this question, right? So always remember, most common cause of spherocytosis is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So most common cause of spherocytosis is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So this point we should be very clear, right? So now I understood why I'm saying that spherocytes are seen in PNH, G6PD, thalassemia, hereditary, autoimmune hemolytic anemia. But they're not diagnostic. Like, remember, they're not diagnostic of the hereditary spherocytosis. Moreover, spherocytes, when you see more in the peripheral smear, what should be coming first in your mind is the autoimmune hemolytic anemia, because they are the most common cause of spherocytosis. See, this was the question. This was the question in the AIMS exam, right? And NEET exam also. This is the 21-year-old female, right? She's having jaundice, hemolytic anemia. Came to the OPD. Peripheral smear was prepared, and now peripheral smear is shown here. Most likely diagnosis. Can you tell me what is most likely diagnosis? What is most likely diagnosis? Yes. So always remember, never get biased by seeing the spherocytes, right? So because you are going to see here, can you see this is the lymphocyte? Shubham, see this. This is the lymphocyte, right? And now if you see the lymphocyte, RBC should be of the same size. Normal RBC should be of the same size. So this is the normal RBC. Can you see this? This one is the marking. Normal RBC. So like that you have to identify rule of 5, rule of observation, rule of comparison, identify the normal RBC, remember, and identify the stain. So now we have seen that this is the normal RBC and this is the lymphocyte. Right? Now you compare this normal RBC with surrounding. Can you see this? Can you see this? Can you see all these cells? How are these cells? Larger or smaller? Shubham, can you tell me? Larger or smaller? Larger or smaller, Shubham? Are you hearing me? Yes, very good. So that's what. So that is how you are going to identify on the clinical exam, on peripheral smear examination, right? So now we are seeing a small spherocyte. So all these are spherocytes. Let me check from another color, right? So these are red color which I'm marking. All these are spherocytes, right? So all these are spherocytes. So you are seeing so many spherocytes. So I'm just putting plus, 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 right? So what is your diagnosis? Question was, what is your diagnosis, right? So what is your diagnosis? When you are seeing spherocytes, autoimmune hemolytic anemia. I understood. So that is how question will be asked. So that time you should not think that it is a hereditary spherocytosis because I'm seeing so many spherocytes, right? So that time you should not think like that. Clear? So whenever examiner says 21 female, can you see that autoimmune disorders are seen in female, reproductive age group 20 to 40 years, 20 to 50 years. So that question is giving him from the beginning itself, 21 female, jaundice, hemolytic anemia, most likely It is autoimmune hemolytic anemia, where we can see numerous spherocytes. Clear? Fine. Right. Now, in hereditary spherocytosis, what will be the lab finding? Okay. Let me tell you first clinical finding. First, I will tell you clinical finding, right? What is the clinical finding you will see in hereditary spherocytosis? Right. So, first of all, you will notice they are having hemolytic anemia. Hemolytic anemia, right? Because of the episodic, because of the consistent hemolysis, they will be having gallstones also, right? Because of the excessive damage, gallstone will be formed, and these gallstones will be pigmented gallstones, right? So, pigmented gallstones. And third one is the right. So, hemolytic anemia, pigmented gallstone. Yeah, if history of spectrum is given, then you can choose. From if history of if RBC membrane protein mutation history is given, then you should choose hereditary spherocytosis. Simply they are talking, then you should not choose. Right. So hemolytic anemia, gallstone, and jaundice. These are the characteristic triads. Right. These are the characteristic triad of the hereditary spherocytosis. Remember this triad what I have written here. Right. This will be also seen in one more anemia. Just I'm writing because we will be discussing later on. This will be also seen in sickle cell anemia. Remember, this will be also seen in sickle cell anemia. Same hemolytic anemia, pigmented gallstones, and jaundice. All three will be present in this also. Right. So what is the difference? This was the question in the NEET exam 2015. Because there is a minor difference. And what is that minor difference? That minor difference is the hemolytic anemia. Hemolytic anemia will be moderate or milder, whereas hemolytic anemia will be severe in sickle cell anemia. As for sickle, as for severe. Right. So like this we have to remember. Hemolytic anemia will be mild to moderate. Mild to moderate. Whereas in sickle cell anemia, hemolytic anemia will be severe hemolytic anemia. So now you understood. That is the point you have to remember. There is a triad: hemolytic anemia, pigmented gallstone, jaundice. Hemolytic anemia, pigmented gallstone, jaundice seen in sickle cell anemia. Difference: hereditary spherocytosis mild to moderate, and in case of sickle cell anemia, it will be severe. Right. So now you understood. This is the hereditary spherocytosis. This is the hereditary spherocytosis. Right. Now come to the lab finding. What will be the lab finding in hereditary spherocytosis? Right. So already I have told you when you are going to see the peripheral smear, you will be finding spherocytes. Right. You will be finding spherocytes. Number one. Number two, you will directly see the MCHC. What will happen to the MCHC? MCHC will be increased. That's what I have told you in the beginning. When I was telling you all the RBC indices, that time I told you MCHC is very rarely increased, and this will be increased in the hereditary spherocytosis. Right. So mean cell hemoglobin concentration will be increased because of the loss of the water from the cells. Right. Water from the cells will be released. That is why MCHC is getting increased here. Right. Now I wanted to ask you the important thing. What will happen to the reticulocyte count in this case? Reticulocyte count. What will be the reticulocyte count in the hereditary spherocytosis? Increase or decrease? Increase. Very good. Increased. So hereditary spherocytosis, reticulocyte count will increase because it's a hemolytic anemia, right? Fine. Now I'm saying you a known case of hereditary spherocytosis patient is coming to you. You are seeing his report, and now his report is showing that reticulocyte count is decreased. Reticulocyte count is decreased. So what is your inference here? What is your inference here? What do you think? Lab error or viral infections? Can you tell me in the comment box? Very good, very good. It is a viral infection, right? So always remember, whenever you find this kind of presentation, right? Whenever you find this kind of presentation, right? So think about the viral infections, right? This is the viral infection. Which virus? Right, very good. It's a parvovirus B19. Parvovirus B19 infection. What they will do? What they will do? They will cause damage of the all stem cells. All stem cells. They will damage bone marrow, right? So bone marrow, they will damage all the stem cells. What are the stem cells? Erythroid, right? Granulocytic precursors, and platelet precursors, right? And platelet precursors in the bone marrow, right? So because of all these damage, this patient will be having aplastic anemia, right? Aplastic anemia. Bone marrow is getting damaged, so they will be developing an aplastic anemia, and this aplastic anemia development is called as aplastic crisis. This is called as aplastic crisis, right? So now you understood who will cause aplastic crisis? Who will cause aplastic crisis? Now examiner is asking which infection is going to cause aplastic crisis? Parvovirus B19. So now you understood in a known case of hereditary spherocytosis, when a patient is coming to you, he is showing his report, his retic count is decreased, and he is telling, sir, when I was googling it, I read that hereditary spherocytosis retic count should be increased. Why might it is decreased? Is it some lab error? Then what you will tell that, no sir, it is not because of lab error, it is because of the viral infection, right? It's a parvovirus B19 probably infecting you, and which is causing damage of all these bone marrow cells, causing aplastic anemia, and this condition is called as aplastic crisis. He will worry, oh my god, what is this? Then what are you going to tell him? Sir, don't worry, this is a transient crisis, that's all. This is the transient crisis which will last only for 5 to 7 days. So you just need a symptomatic treatment, that's all. You will be all fine after some time. So now understood, transient for 5 to 7 days. Aplastic crisis is transient for 5 to 7 days, right? Now come to the question which came in previous year already exam. Question was, parvovirus B19 infection is having highest affinity for which of the following stem cell? Which? Very good. So that is the very important question which I wanted to tell you. So remember, when examiner will ask you, so erythroid precursors are most commonly damaged by parvovirus. Now you will understand now? You don't get any confusion. Parvovirus, most commonly they damage erythroid precursors. Please remember this point. This was NEET question and in 2018, right? Parvovirus B19 infection in the bone marrow is having higher affinity for destruction of which progenitor cell? Answer was most commonly for erythroid progenitor cell, not for the granulocyte, not for the platelet. All will be damaged, but maximum affinity they will be having for erythroid precursors. No, I'm not talking about the parvovirus will be having 5 to 7 days, right? They will be having symptoms for 5 to 7 days. After that, spontaneously it will be gone. See, that spontaneous recovery is not because of the incubation period. That is because of the immunity of our individual body, right? I'm not talking about the incubation period. I don't have any idea. You have to confirm it with the microbiologist, right? I'll not say. I'll say 5 to 7 days. Then you will be having fight with the microbiology facilities, and you told me like this, and then they were telling like that. So you have to confirm it, right? I'm just telling you the clinical facts. I don't have any association with the incubation period, right? So I understood parvovirus B19 is having most common association with erythroid precursors, right? So erythroid will be most commonly damaged, but remember all will be damaged. All will be damaged, but most commonly erythroid will be damaged. Aplastic anemia will develop, and this crisis is called as aplastic crisis, right? So known case of hereditary spherocytosis, decreased reticulocyte count is example of aplastic crisis. Clear? Right. Now come to the diagnosis. How we are going to diagnose? The hereditary spherocytosis. So remember, for diagnosis of the hereditary spherocytosis, we are going to use a screening test. So So what is the name of the screening test? Pink's osmotic fragility. So remember Pink's, it was the name of the scientist. Pink's osmotic fragility test. Don't think that his blood will become pink and that is why. It's the name of the scientist. Pink's osmotic fragility test. Who has discovered this Pink's osmotic fragility test, right? So here what I want to say, first of all, that when you are going to see a normal RBC, so this is the normal RBC, right? Normal RBC is isotonic. Normal RBC is isotonic to 0.9% of NaCl. So that is the important point you have to keep in mind, right? So what is the normal? What is the important thing? Whenever you are going to see a normal RBC, is isotonic to the 0.9% of the normal saline. Okay. Now the question is, normal RBC hemolysis. I'm talking about normal RBC hemolysis starts at what concentration? Completed by what concentration? I understood. So this point we have to keep in mind in our exam point of view. Normal hemolysis will start at 0.5% of NaCl. So I'm just rounding off. I'm just rounding off 0.48 only, but I will just say that 0.5%. So that easy to remember, right? And it will be completed by 0.3% of NaCl. Okay. So I understood these are the two important questions. Normal RBC hemolysis starts at 0.5%, completed by 0.3%. Clear? Right. Now come to the hereditary spherocytosis. Complete hereditary spherocytosis. What happens in hereditary spherocytosis? In hereditary spherocytosis, osmotic fragility is increased. I understood. What I'm saying that in hereditary spherocytosis, osmotic fragility is increased. So what is the meaning of osmotic fragility increase? What is the meaning of osmotic fragility increase? Is it not visible to all? Is it visible to all of you? Sahil, I think you refresh it. Sahil, somebody messaged because my keypad is not there. Sahil, is it okay, Sahil? Are you there? Can you see me? Visible to all? I think this video is gone, I think. Okay. Okay, fine. So I was telling you why osmotic fragility is increased. When you will say osmotic fragility is increased, when you find hemolysis is occurring at more than 0.5% of NaCl, which you will see in this case. Now, understood. So in hereditary spherocytosis, hemolysis is increased, right? Osmotic fragility increase means hemolysis is increased and it will be more than 0.5% of the NaCl. So hemolysis at more than 0.5% means more than 0.6, 0.7, 0.8 and even at 0.9% also, right? Even at the normal isotonic value also, if they are getting hemolysis, it means osmotic fragility is increased. Clear? So when you will say that osmotic fragility is decreased, so that's done. Osmotic fragility increase is done. This is the osmotic fragility increase. Now I'm telling that when you will say that decrease in osmotic fragility, when hemolysis is incomplete, even at 0.3% and down. So where you will see this decreased hemolysis is seen in thalassemia. Just remember one example, which will be useful for the discussion, right? So now understood. There are 2 points I have told you here, right? Number 1, osmotic fragility increase. Number 2, osmotic fragility decrease. Osmotic fragility increase means hemolysis at more than 0.5%. Osmotic fragility decrease means it is incomplete hemolysis, even at the 0.3% or below that also, which you will see in case of thalassemia, right? So is it clear to all of you? So Pink's osmotic fragility is mere screening test, not for confirmation. Pink's osmotic fragility is mere screening test. So all these are very important points. So how we are going to confirm the diagnosis? So diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis can be confirmed by flow cytometry. Right? Can be confirmed by flow cytometry. So now you remember this one. Flow cytometry will confirm the diagnosis, right? So this point is, I think, clear. So diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis is confirmed by flow cytometry. There is another, osmotic gradient ectocytometry is a mechanism method. Just remember the name, right? Because this name has been mentioned in JEE exam. So just I'm telling you, right? Just remember this name. This is one of the important tests for the screening, not for the confirmation. It is for the screening. What is the important thing you have to remember? This is more sensitive than osmotic fragility test, right? So these are the important things you have to remember. More sensitive than osmotic fragility test, osmotic gradient ectocytometry. That is what I wanted to tell. Eosin 5-melamine is a dye. Eosin 5-melamine is a dye. And this dye we are using in the hereditary spherocytosis diagnosis by the flow cytometry. So this will confirm the diagnosis, right? So eosin 5-melamine test is using flow cytometry, and by using flow cytometry, it can confirm the diagnosis. Understood? So diagnosis confirmation is given by flow cytometry, as you can see. And which dye we can use here? We can use eosin 5-melamine test. This was previous year's JEE question. Eosin 5-melamine test is used for diagnosis of which anemia? So now understood? It's a hereditary spherocytosis. Now let me ask you one question. This is how questions are asked in AIIMS exam, and this is how it will be asked in the next exam also, right? A patient was positive for eosin 5-melamine test. See this. A patient was positive for eosin 5-melamine test, and on mutational analysis by the flow cytometry, which of the following defect you will find? Spectrin, ankyrin, or GPI anchor protein? That is how question will be asked. What is the answer now? Understood? This is how examiner will be asking. Yeah, this is how examiner will be asking, right? So this is an easy question. Just you need to remember that these are the tests. Osmotic gradient ectocytometry is positive. Patient will be positive for which of the following mutations? Answer will be ankyrin, right? So that is how question is asked in AIIMS exam, or it will be asked in NEET exam, right? So this is done. Now coming to the next anemia. Next anemia is G6PD deficiency anemia. Another hemolytic anemia. Another hemolytic anemia which we are going to discuss is the G6PD deficiency anemia. Right. So G6PD deficiency anemia, there was a statement in the NEET exam. G6PD deficiency anemia is seen in females. True or false? Seen commonly in females. Commonly in females. False statement, very good. Because these are the X-linked recessive. You remember? X-linked recessive disorders are commonly seen in males. So males are commonly affected than females. Right. Right. Now, G6PD deficiency anemia, what are the important things? What is the etiology? First we should know that. What is the etiology of G6PD deficiency anemia? Right. So here I'll tell you these are 3 important etiology for G6PD deficiency anemia. Number 1 is the drugs. Second is infections. And third is even the food. So these are the 3 common things which can cause G6PD deficiency anemia. Right? Drugs, infections, and food. Which drug? So drugs most commonly associated with G6PD is primaquine anti-malarial drug. Primaquine anti-malarial. Right? So this is the anti-malarial you would have read in your second MBBS also. You might be reading in your anti-malarial drug. Right? For malaria prophylaxis, we can write primaquine. Infections, they are associated with all kind of infection, but amongst the infection, they are most commonly associated with the bacterial infections. Most commonly associated with bacterial infection. They are associated with many kind of food, but they are most commonly associated with the fava beans. right? They are commonly associated with fava beans, right? And this will be called as, when they will be developing G6PD anemia, that will be called as favism. So I understood. So these are the three important things for etiology of the G6PD deficiency anemia: drugs, infections, food. Amongst the drug, what is most common? Primaquine, which is the anti-malarial drug, right? Infections, what is most common? Bacterial. Food, fava beans, and when fava beans will be causing G6PD deficiency anemia, they are called as favism, right? So these are the etiology of the G6PD deficiency anemia. Now we will understand pathogenesis, right? But before we understand pathogenesis, we should know that what happens in a normal individual. What happens in a normal individual blood, right? And what is the G6PD? So G6PD is an enzyme. G6PD is an enzyme which is formed during the normal HMP pathway, which we have read in the biochemistry, right? So normal HMP pathway, G6PD enzyme will be formed. When this G6PD enzyme is formed, right, they will help in synthesis of NADPH, right? So they will synthesize NADPH. What is NADPH? What is NADPH? Can you see? Can you see something? There is a H, hydrogen. You remember what I have told you? Electron is oxidation, hydrogen is reduction. So this NADPH is a reducing substance, right? So what is this? This NADPH is a reducing substance because of the hydrogen. So because of this hydrogen, we are calling them reducing substance, right? So inside the RBC, this is happening inside the RBC. So what they are going to do? They are going to reduce the glutathione of the RBC into reduced form of glutathione, right? So I understood. G6PD enzyme, which is formed during HMP pathway, they will synthesize NADPH, which is having hydrogen, a reducing compound, reduces glutathione into the reduced form of glutathione, right? So what is the function of this reduced form of glutathione? Now we will see that in a normal individual. Suppose it is a normal individual taking drug like a primaquine or bacterial infection or fava bean injection. So what will happen? Free radical will be formed, right? Free radical will be formed. Free radical. So can you see this free radical is having electron? So electron is capable of oxidative damage. So if they come to the RBC, they can cause damage of the RBC. But this is not happening. Why? Because there is a reduced form of glutathione. This reduced form of glutathione is going to inactivate the free radical. So now you can see this. This reduced form of glutathione is going to inactivate free radical, right? So they are going to inactivate the free radical. So due to inactivation of this free radical, now reduced form is getting oxidized into the glutathione and free radical has been inactivated. So that is how RBC is survived. So now we can see that RBC is survived, no damage. So now I understood this is the normal individual. This is the normal individual. So I understood G6PD pathway, G6PD enzyme will form reducing substance, reduces glutathione into reduced form. This reduced form will inactivate the free radical which has been formed by drugs, infections, or all these things, right? Right. Now you can see the same cycle I am showing you when you are going to see in G6PD deficiency anemia, right? G6PD deficiency anemia, you can see G6PD is deficient. So what will happen? NADPH is also deficient, and because of this deficiency, you will see there is a reduced or no conversion from the glutathione to reduced form of drug, right? So as a result, what will happen? Whenever this patient will be having drugs, infections, or fava beans, free radical will be formed because there is no reduced form. No reduced form. So this free radical, now you can see this free radical is free to cause damage of the RBC. I understood. Free radical is free to cause damage of the RBC because there is no free radical. There is no free radical. There is no reduced form of glutathione. So free radical is not getting neutralized by anyone, not inactivated by anyone. They will come and by virtue of electron, they will oxidize. Oxidative damage. Remember first chapter, oxidative damage. Free radical, oxidative damage. So what they are going to oxidize in the RBC? RBC is full of hemoglobin, right? So hemoglobin will be oxidized. They will be denatured, and this denatured hemoglobin is called as Hinge bodies. Denatured hemoglobin is called as Hinge bodies, right? So there was a question in the NEET exam. What is Hinge bodies precisely? So precisely these are the denatured globin. So that was the answer. So always keep that in your mind, right? So denatured globin is the Hinge bodies. Denatured globin is the Hinge body, right? So here denatured hemoglobin is Hinge body, but if examiner is asking very precisely, it is denatured globin which is called as Hinge body. Clear? So now you understood pathogenesis of the G6PD deficiency anemia. G6PD is deficient, NADPH is reduced or absent, and because of this absence or reduced form, there will be no reduction of glutathione in the RBC, and as a result, free radicals which will be formed by drugs, infections, or food, they will cause oxidative damage of the hemoglobin. They will denature the globin and they will convert them into Hinge bodies. Clear? Hinge bodies we cannot see on routine staining. That is the another important thing, right? Just a minute. Here I want to tell you the peripheral smear of the G6PD deficiency anemia, right? So number one, Hinge bodies, right? So as I have told you, Hinge bodies are due to denatured globin, right? Number one. Second important point, we cannot see, remember, never stained with Romanowski stain, right? So that was the question in the JIPMER exam and PJ exam. Never stained with the Romanowski stain, right? Never stained with the Romanowski stain. So what stain we can use for the Hinge bodies? For Hinge bodies, which stain should be used? A supravital stain, which is called as crystal violet, right? So now you understood. Hinge bodies, denatured hemoglobin or globin, never stained with the Romanowski stain. To visualize them, we have to use the supravital stain, which is called crystal violet. Clear? Right. Second thing, when you are going to see the RBC here, remember, when you are going to see the RBC here, they will be looking like this, right? What is this called as? White cell. Hemoglobin. Right, so white cells are due to denatured hemoglobin, right? Is it clear? So now the question in the NEET exam was, which is most characteristic of the peripheral smear? Out of these two, which is most characteristic of the peripheral smear? Most characteristic. Right, so always remember, because Hinge bodies we cannot see the routine smear, right? So it is not characteristic. What will be characteristic? White cells are the most characteristic finding seen on peripheral smear. So that was the question in the exam. So white cells are the most characteristic on the peripheral smear. It's not Hinge bodies, because Hinge bodies we will require supravital stain, crystal violet. So they are not the most characteristic on the peripheral smear. Most characteristic on the peripheral smear is white cell, and these are formed because of denatured hemoglobin. So now you can see this picture. Can you see this picture? Is very good picture given in Robbins also. In this diagram, I will show you. there are two cells. Can you see? First of all, you see the smear. Don't look at this satellite area. Can you tell me what are these staining? Anybody? Can you tell me what are these stains? Romanovsky stain, right? So this is the Romanovsky stain, and in this Romanovsky stain, right? Can you see anywhere hinge bodies? Can you see anywhere in this entire slide hinge bodies? No, right? So I understood Romanovsky stain, hinge bodies we have never seen, right? I understood. To visualize hinge bodies, you have to use the crystal violet stain, right? So this is the crystal violet stain. This is the crystal violet stain, and all these blue color is the hinge bodies, right? So that is how you see the hinge bodies, right? So that is why I said this is the most characteristic. What are these cells? What are these cells? White cells. So I understood. White cells are the most characteristic of the G6PD deficiency anemia, right? So why this white cell has been formed? Why this white cell has been formed? Can you see this? This area is still having hemoglobin. This area is having still hemoglobin, right? But it is not catching up the stain because these are all denatured, right? So you understood? These are all denatured hemoglobin. Denatured hemoglobin. Normal hemoglobin will combine with Romanovsky stain. Understood? Normal hemoglobin will combine with the Romanovsky stain. Abnormal or denatured hemoglobin will not combine. So that is why these are all stained, and white cells are due to the denatured hemoglobin, right? Now you can apply logic also, because in Robbins you will read that macrophage has eaten up. If macrophage is eating this RBC, then why macrophage is definitely macrophage are eaten here? So why they are having smooth round surface? Why RBC membrane is smooth round? If they have eaten, they should be eaten here, na? They should be eaten here, na? Why they are looking like this? So that's what we have to understand. These are not because of the macrophage eating. Remember, because why I'm telling in Robbins you'll be getting confused. But if you read the intro or recent articles in the hematology, you will find this point, and that is how questions should be asked in your exam or will be asked in your exam, right? So white cells are always, remember, due to the denatured hemoglobin. Denatured hemoglobin, precisely due to, right? Okay, so that's done, right? Coming to the next anemia. Next hemolytic anemia is the paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria, right? So next anemia which I'm going to discuss is the paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. Paroxysmal means the fits of the symptoms. Nocturnal is night. Hemoglobinuria is hemoglobin. So after seeing this name, if I ask you which kind of hemolysis will be seen in PNH, intravascular or extravascular? PNH, intravascular or extravascular? Name itself is telling hemoglobinuria, right? I understood. Name itself is telling hemoglobinuria. So this is a intravascular hemolysis. That was the older Ames question. That is why I wanted to ask, right? What I want to say that the name paroxysmal and nocturnal is a misnomer because both are seen only in 25%. Nocturnal. Paroxysmal, nocturnal events seen only in 25% of the cases. That is why this name is misnomer, but for the sake of carrying on, they are carrying it. That's all. Right? What is PNH? Can you tell me what is the PNH? Is it really RBC defect or is it a stem cell disorder? That is the other important concept. PNH is a stem cell disorder. Always remember. PNH is a stem cell disorder. Right? What is the problem? Paroxysm is continuous fits. Your continuous cough current. उसको paroxysm. कोई भी चीज continuous हो रही है. Right? रुक के आ रही है. 5 मिनट का सांस शांत हो गया. So this is called paroxysm. Like anything, urine में आया, hemoglobin तो उसको ही बोल रहे हैं paroxysm. So continuously रुक के आने को paroxysm. Episodic. जिसको हम एक simple word में बोले episodes करके आ रहे हैं frequently. Right? So उसको हम paroxysm बोल रहे हैं. Right? So what is the problem in the PNH? PNH will be having a gene called as, sorry, I will just tell you first about the normal stem cell. As I said, it's a stem cell disorder. So first I should say that what is the normal stem cell consist of? Normal stem cell consists of the Piga gene. Piga gene. Remember, this is called Piga gene. So Piga gene, what they are going to do? Piga gene full form I have written here, phosphatidyl glycosyl A. Phosphatidyl glycosyl A is called Piga. Piga gene is synthesizing GPI anchor protein. GPI is same full form, glycosyl, phosphatidyl, and AP is anchor protein, right? So Piga gene synthesizes GPI anchor protein which is present on the stem cell surface. So I understood. I am showing you a normal stem cell. Encoded by Piga gene having GPI anchor protein on their surface. This anchor protein, as you can see the name, they are anchoring a complement regulatory proteins. They are anchoring the complement regulatory protein. What is the function of complement regulatory protein? Complement regulatory protein, their basic function is to inactivate membrane attack complex. To inactivate membrane attack complex. You remember complement pathway? Membrane attack complex C5, C9, right? So that is why name is complement regulatory protein. They are regulating the complement membrane attack complex. Now you understood? So this GPI anchor protein is holding complement regulatory protein which will inactivate membrane attack complex. Clear? So what is complement regulatory protein? There are three important complement regulatory proteins: CD59, CD55, and C8 binding protein. Right? So as I said, complement regulatory proteins are of three types: CD59, CD55, and C8 binding protein. CD59 is also called as MIRL. Right? MIRL means membrane inhibitor of reactive lysis. MIRL stands for membrane inhibitor of reactive lysis. That was the question in the NEET exam. That is why I am writing. Which of the following is the CD marker of membrane inhibitor of reactive lysis? Which is the marker of membrane inhibitor of reactive lysis? So answer is CD59. So understood. CD59 is the marker of membrane inhibitor reactive lysis. That is the name of membrane inhibitor reactive lysis. And what is the CD55? What is CD55? CD55 stands for decay accelerating factor. Decay accelerating factor. Right? So now you understood. That is how question will be asked in your exam, right? So what is CD55 is decay accelerating factor and CD59 is a membrane inhibitor of reactive lysis. There was a question in the NEET and DLP exam. CD59 and CD55 is associated with which anemia? Like that exam will be asking. Now you understood. That is how exam will be asking. Exam will not be asking like GPI or this thing. They will be asking that CD59 is associated with which anemia? PNH. 55 is associated with which anemia? PNH. Right? Now you understood. So there are three proteins: CD59, 55, C8 binding protein. These three are collectively called as complement regulatory protein. Function of these three proteins is to inactivate the membrane attack complex. Clear? So again I repeat. Normal stem cell is encoded by Piga gene, which consists of GPI anchor protein, which is anchoring the complement regulatory protein. Complement regulatory protein, these are three important: CD59, 55, and C8 binding protein. Their basic function is to inactivate membrane attack complex to save the damage of the cells. Clear? Now come to the pathology. Out of all these things, why I have shown you this normal structure? Because examiner asked you the question: out of all these, which is the most important mutation? Can you tell me? which is the most important mutation in PNH? What should be the right answer? Who is the most important? Can you tell me who is the most important? This one or this one? Who is parent? Who is important? Father? Means parents are more important or we are more important? Who came first? Who came first? Parents, right? So parents are the most important. Don't say that CD59. That is wrong answer. That's for the eighth question, right? So that is why I wanted to discuss this point. So most important mutation when examiner is going to ask you, that is meaning overall. And overall most important mutation is the GPI anchor protein. Okay, number one. Number two, see the language now. Most important, let me choose some color. Most important complement regulatory protein in PNH. Most important mutation in the complement regulatory protein in the PNH. Then your answer should be CD59. Now I hope you have got the clear idea about the language. How your in comparison to the anchor protein. But when examiner is talking about amongst these complementary protein, then your answer should be 59, which is MIR. Clear? Right. So what happens? I will just show you in pathogenesis of PNH. Pathogenesis of the PNH. Right? Whenever there is acidosis, right? Whenever there is acidosis means see acidosis, why it will be acidosis? Whenever we are under stress, right? We are under stress, what will happen? We will be having less oxygen and more carbon dioxide, more bicarbonate, more H plus acidic pH, right? So that is the reason. Whenever we are under stress, acidic pH will be there, right? So whenever there is a stress, this will create acidosis or this will stimulate acidosis in our blood. But how a normal individual is going to respond? So stress is inducing acidosis, which will activate the complement pathways. Remember, this is very, very important concept. Acidosis will activate the complement pathway. And when complement pathway is activated, we all remember very well. Complement pathway activation, there will be membrane attack complex pathway. Remember, the terminal end product in the complement pathway is membrane attack complex pathway, right? So stress activating acidosis or stimulating acidosis, activating the complement pathway, membrane attack complex is formed. Fine, but we are talking about normal individual. In this picture, we are talking about the normal individual. Normal. Right? So normal individual, what you will see that? Suppose this is the blood vessel, right? Now we are talking about the peripheral blood. In the blood vessel, which cell is running? Can you see what I have seen? All these three cells I have to keep together. R for RBC, W for WBC, and P for platelet, right? So RBC, WBC, platelet, all are derived from the stem cell, right? Stem cell. So they will be having GP anchor protein. GP anchor protein is having C-reactive protein. Complement regulatory protein, and this complement regulatory protein will inactivate this membrane attack complex. Now you understood? That is the function of the complement regulatory protein. So they will inactivate it, right? So I understood? They will not allow them. So they will not allow the membrane attack complex to damage. That is the normal individual. You understood or not? You all understood? Stress, acidosis, complement pathway, membrane attack complex is formed. But under normal condition, our RBC, WBC, platelet, they are having anchor protein, which is having complement regulatory protein, and this complement regulatory protein will inactivate the membrane attack complex. So membrane attack complex is inactivated. That's all. Game over. No problem to the normal individual. But now look at the PNH patient. What is going to happen? Whenever stress is there, stress will induce acidosis. Acidosis will activate complement pathway, and as a result, membrane attack complex will be formed. And see what is happening now? What is happening in the blood vessel? In the blood vessel, RBC, WBC, platelet, they do not have GPI anchor protein because they are mutant, right? And because of this mutation, this is also not working, right? Or they may be also mutant. So because of this mutation, this is also affected. So all are affected. So there is no protection. So there is no protection. So what is going to happen? This membrane attack complex is going to cause damage of which cell? All cells. All will be damaged. So I understood. All will be damaged. So that is how we can understand in this patient what will be the finding. RBC is damaged. So what you are going to see? Hemolytic anemia, right? Hemolytic anemia and RBC, WBC, platelet, all are damaged. What is this called as? All cell complete decrease in peripheral blood. That is called as pancytopenia. Right? And then you will see that the platelet, when after they are going to damage, they will form the thrombi. Right? And this is called third point. Hemolytic anemia, pancytopenia, and thrombi. Right? Thrombi, or you can say thrombosis. Right? Thrombosis, right? So can you see these are the three important things which I am showing you. One is the hemolytic anemia, second is the pancytopenia, third is the thrombosis, and remember this is called as characteristic triad of the PNH. So remember this is called as characteristic triad of the PNH. So this was the question. In AIMS 2015, right? No, sorry, in 2000, older question, not the 15. It's older question. I don't remember, but it's not the. But it's important thing. PNH triad. What are the PNH triad? Hemolytic anemia, pancytopenia, thrombosis. Why this question has been asked in AIMS exam? Why? There is a clinical significance. What is the clinical significance? I'll tell you. Let me tell you one more point. Where you will see the thrombosis. Thrombosis is usually seen in the GIT, right? And in GIT also commonly it is seen in the hepatic vein thrombosis. Mostly it is hepatic vein thrombosis, right? Hepatic vein thrombosis, we all know that it is also called as Budd-Chiari syndrome, right? This is also called as Budd-Chiari syndrome. So why I'm writing all these things so that we can understand that. This PNH is also a cause of Budd-Chiari syndrome. PNH is also a cause of Budd-Chiari syndrome by doing thrombosis in the hepatic vein. Right? Now I will tell you what is the clinical scenario. How question will be asked or how you are going to face in your personal life when you are dealing with these kind of PNH patient. Right? So here I will tell you what happens. Patient will come to you and you are examining his peripheral blood. You are seeing the areas of hemolytic anemia and pancytopenia. So you are seeing hemolytic anemia, pancytopenia. Right? Two findings. Then you ask the patient, do you have any other report? He will say, sir, one scan report is with me. So his scan report is showing that he is having hepatic vein thrombosis. So what will be your conclusion now? First diagnosis which should come to your mind is the PNH. That is why examiner is asking this question, right? So when you are working as a gastrosurgeon or gastrologist and you are seeing a hepatic vein thrombosis and your pathologist myself is sending you a report, hemolytic anemia and pancytopenia is seen. Hemolytic anemia and pancytopenia feature is seen. Kindly correlate clinically. In your hand, you know that there is a hepatic vein thrombosis from the radiology department. So first of all, you should have a hard suspicion for the PNH. First suspicion is for PNH. That is why this PNH triad is very important. Understood? This triad is not going to see in any other anemia. So hemolytic anemia, pancytopenia, thrombosis in the hepatic vein will be the characteristic feature of the PNH. That is why I was telling you this is having clinical significance also, right? And remember, this hepatic vein thrombosis is also a most common cause of death in PNH. So this is the most common cause of death in PNH patient. Right. So most common cause of death in PNH patient is also hepatic vein thrombosis. Clear? Done. Everybody? Right. Now coming to the screening of PNH patient. When we are talking about the diagnosis, right? So in diagnosis we will do two things: screening and confirmation. Right. So what is the screening test for the PNH? Can you tell me in the comment box? The screening test is Ham's test, sucrose lysis test. Right. Nowadays we don't do all these things, right? Ham's test or sucrose lysis nowadays is not performed. Right. But example is asking in the MCQ exam, right? So that is why you have to remember. Same principle. You have to add the acidic solution into the blood sample and check the result. Acidic solution. Acidic solution will activate the complement pathway. Normal individual, no hemolysis. And PNH individual, hemolysis. That is the same thing for Ham's test also. And sucrose, why sucrose? Because sucrose is an acidic sugar. Sucrose is an acidic sugar. That is why it will create the acidic pH, right? Nowadays what we are doing? Nowadays we are doing gel card test. So just remember for the namesake. Gel card is used for the same thing, right? So these are the screening tests. Confirmation is done by flow cytometry. Confirmation is done by flow cytometry, where you will analyze GPI anchor protein, CD59 and CD55. Right? So like hereditary spherocytosis, this is also getting confirmed by GPI anchor protein, right? Now my question is, can PNH transform into aplastic anemia? That was the question in the PGI exam. PNH transform into aplastic anemia, possible or not? Yes. So yes, PNH can transform. Can PNH transform? All three are stem cell disorder and they can all have transformation into acute leukemia. So all three disorders together, PNH, aplastic anemia, myelodysplastic syndrome, because they can transform into leukemia, that is why collectively these are called as pre-leukemic condition. Pre-leukemic condition. Right, so that was the question in the AIMS exam. Right, which of the following is a pre-leukemic condition? So which is pre-leukemic? All are pre-leukemic. PNH, aplastic anemia, MDS. Because all three can transform into the acute leukemia. Right? Fine. Obviously, stem cell is affected, so they will be having pancytopenia as the feature. Right? That's great correlation. Very good. So that's done. So PNH is done. Right. Now coming to the next anemia is the immune hemolytic anemia. Another very important topic which examiner is asking in exam. Immune hemolytic anemias. Immune hemolytic anemia, nowadays it is also called as autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Older name is, nowadays not. Older name is autoimmune hemolytic anemia. This is nowadays called as immune hemolytic anemia. So as you can see that immune hemolytic anemia, why it is called as immune hemolytic anemia? Because antibodies are damaging the RBC. That's all. Antibody induced RBC damage is present in the autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Name itself is telling, right? Now what kind of antibody? What kind of antibody we are going to see? There are two types of antibodies, warm type and cold type. Why it is called as warm type? Why it is called as warm type? Because antibody will be having optimum activity. Antibody will be causing damage of the RBC, right? At the warm temperature like 37 degrees Celsius. Why it is called as cold? Because antibody can damage RBC at colder temperature, which is the 4 degrees Celsius. So now understood. Warm, cold. That is why name is warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia and cold type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Right? And remember, this warm type and cold type is the lab finding. Because 37 degrees Celsius it's okay, but 4 degrees Celsius you will not find in our human body. So whenever you are suspecting immune hemolytic anemia, you will take the blood sample, you will incubate them at 37 degree and 4 degree both. And when you are going to observe hemolysis at this, it's the warm type. Hemolysis at this, it's the cold type. Right? Which is most common type? Which is most common type? Warm type is the most common type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Right? So remember, warm type is most common type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Right? Warm type, which antibody is present? So warm type will be having IgG antibody. IgG. Right? Warm will be having IgG. In Hindi you can say that garam, but this is little confusing also. You will understand after some time. Right? So warm type is IgG antibody, which is formed here against the RBC. So this antibody is IgG antibody. Right? What about the cold type? Cold type is having two antibody, IgM and IgG. So that is why I said this mnemonic will not work because cold type is also having IgG antibody. Right? IgM antibody is called as cold agglutinin. Agglutinin. And IgG is called as cold hemolysin. Cold hemolysin. So these are the two subtypes of the antibody, IgM, IgG, in the cold type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Right? So understood. Cold type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia, IgM is called as agglutinin, IgG is called as hemolysin. Right? Here. So IgM is agglutinin, IgG is hemolysin. This IgG, which is hemolysin, they are also known as Donut-Landsteiner antibody. Remember, this IgG hemolysin is also known as Donut-Landsteiner antibody. So just remember another way, Donut-Landsteiner antibody. And this Donut-Landsteiner antibody will be seen in anemia, which is called as PCH. PCH, paroxysmal cold hemoglobinuria. Hemoglobinuria, right? In short, we'll be writing PCH, right? So it is not PNH. PNH is paroxysmal nocturnal hemoglobinuria. And what is this? It's a paroxysmal cold hemoglobinuria, right? So now understood, these are the immunohemolytic anemia, warm type, cold type. Cold type to antibodies, IgM or agglutinin, because they will be forming clumps with the RBC. They are agglutinating RBC, that is why agglutinin. IgG is called hemolysin because they are going to damage, they are going to lyse the RBC, lysis of the RBC, lysin, lysis of the RBC. And these are Donut-Landsteiner antibody, and this will cause paroxysmal cold hemoglobinuria. So one by one we will see. First I will tell you warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. First I will tell you about warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia is associated with, or you can say that most commonly associated with, which leukemia? Can you tell me? Which leukemia? Chronic lymphocytic leukemia. So they are associated with the chronic lymphocytic leukemia. Right. When they are talking about autoimmune disorder, most commonly they are associated with which autoimmune disorder? That was the AIMS question. Warm type is most commonly associated with which autoimmune disorder? Can you tell me? SLE. Many other autoimmune disorders, but SLE is most common. So these are the two very important entities. Right. Now, third, they are also associated with the drugs. Right. They are also associated with the drug. So that is called drug-induced hemolytic anemia. Right. What we will be calling them? Drug-induced autoimmune hemolytic anemia. So what are the drugs? There are two important drugs which we need to remember. One is called penicillin. Penicillin, which I will be writing in short as a P, and second is called methyl dopamine. I'm choosing these two drugs. There are so many, but I'm just choosing these two drugs because they are having different mechanism of the damage, different mechanism of the RBC damage in the warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Clear? So I understood warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia, most commonly associated with which leukemia? CLL. Most commonly associated with which autoimmune disorder? SLE. Right? And what are the drugs? Penicillin, methyl dopamine. These were the questions in the NEET and DLB previous year. Right? Now I'm going to tell you warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Warm type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia caused by drugs. Right? And these are the two important mechanism. Two important mechanism. Number one is by antigenic drug. Number two is by the tolerance breaking drug. Antigenic drugs and tolerance breaking drugs. Antigenic drug. What is antigenic drug? That was the question in the exam. Penicillin is antigen. Can you see P? P stands for penicillin. So this is the penicillin. Right? This is the RBC. This is M stands for methyl dopamine. Right? Can you see this? So now you can see that in this picture, what we can appreciate that RBC is not an antigen. Penicillin is not an antigen. I understood. Both are separate. Separate RBC, separate penicillin is not an antigen. But when RBC is attached with the penicillin, can you see this? Penicillin is getting attached to the RBC, and now this entire structure is behaving like an antigen. So now this entire structure is like an antigen. So this alone is not an antigen. RBC alone, penicillin alone, not an antigen. But when RBC will be getting attached with the penicillin, they will be behaving like an antigen. Right? Same like that. Right? So now they are behaving like an antigen, and this antibody is going to destroy this complex. So I understood this antibody is going to destroy this penicillin with RBC. So this is called antigenic drug because this drug is making them antigenic. Otherwise, alone neither it is antigenic nor penicillin is antigenic. But once penicillin combines with RBC, they will become antigen. That is why name is antigenic drug. So which is antigenic drug mechanism? Penicillin. That is how question will be asked. Which is tolerance breaking drug mechanism? Methyl dopamine. What is happening here? Can you see this? They are both having different thing. Here RBC and penicillin, when they get attached, then they became antigen. But here it is not like that. Methyl dopa is directly inducing the antibody. They are directly inducing antibody in the serum. Antibody in the serum, which will destroy this RBC for the destruction of RBC. Why? See, previously there was immunological tolerance. You remember, in immunology we have discussed immunological tolerance. So previously this RBC was having immunological tolerance, so that there was no autoantibody damage. But what has happened when methyl dopa came? Methyl dopa has induced the antibody. So what they have done? They have done the breakage of the tolerance. Understood? Tolerance breakdown. Tolerance breakdown by whom? By methyl dopa. So tolerance breakdown is done by methyl dopa, and this will induce by that is done by induction of antibody, and this will destroy the RBC. So now understood. These are the two important mechanism of warm type drug-induced autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Antigenic drug is penicillin. Tolerance breaking drug is methyl dopa. Is it clear to all of you? Okay, fine. Now we're moving on to the next one. The cold type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Second type, the less common type. Right? Cold type of autoimmune hemolytic anemia, as I already told you. IgM is agglutinin, IgG is hemolysin. Also known as landsteiner antibody seen in PCH. Right? Seen in paroxysmal cold hemoglobin. Right? Now this is the very good. Here you will see the beautiful correlation between the molecule, clinical presentation, and the peripheral smear examination. That will be shown by IgM antibody. Right? That will be shown by IgM antibody because it is an agglutinin. So IgM is agglutinating all the RBCs. Right? I'm just showing you an example. Right? They are agglutinating. They are making clumps of the RBC. So the question will be asked to you: IgM antibody is formed against which antigen of the RBC? IgM antibodies are formed against which antigen of the RBC in the agglutinin type of cold autoimmune hemolytic anemia? So can you see what is the name? I antigen. So remember, this is I antigen, which is the target of IgM antibody. So IgM antibody are formed against I antigen. This can be the future question. So I understood. IgM antibody is formed against I antigen of the RBC, and they are making clumps or agglutinating them. Right? That is why name is agglutinin. Clear? Now look at the clinical scenario. Now you notice this is the molecular mechanism. I'm just telling you. This is the beautiful correlation. I have told you the molecular mechanism. Right? There is agglutination because IgM is formed against I antigen of the RBC, and now they are forming clumps. Can you see all these are the clumps? Right? This is the molecular mechanism. Number one. Now look at the clinical mechanism. Clinical finding. Right? Now in this clinical finding, what you are observing that RBC is forming clumps. Can you see? RBC is forming clumps because of IgM is present, right? So in this blood vessel, IgM is forming clumps here, right? So because of the clumps, can you see the blood flow? Here blood flow is very good. But what happens to here? When they are going to supply to the end organ. So what is blood flow to this end organ? Increased or decreased? Decreased. Right? Decreased. Understood? So because of this agglutination or clumping, because of this RBC clumps, right? What is happening? We are seeing, because of this RBC clumps, we are seeing ischemic changes. Ischemia. Remember, decreased blood flow. Ischemia to this distant organ. Right? So what will happen? Because of this ischemia, patient may develop Raynaud's phenomena. Raynaud's phenomena. Right? So you remember Raynaud's phenomenon? Already I have told you in immunology topic also, right? What is Raynaud's phenomenon? PCR. Remember that mnemonic? P for pallor, C for cyanosis, R for redness. You remember that? Pallor, cyanosis, and redness. Yeah, I will be teaching. Don't worry. There's nothing here. Raynaud's phenomenon, nothing is there. What to teach here? Already I have taught you everything. But don't worry. I'll be again discussing. Nothing to worry about that thing. So Raynaud's phenomenon is pallor, cyanosis. Now you can see that a beautiful clinical correlation we are getting now. Clinical correlation because of the clumping due to IgM. There is ischemia. There is a decreased blood flow, and this decreased blood flow is precipitating the Raynaud's phenomenon. Right? Precipitating the Raynaud's phenomenon, and because of that, patient will be developing all these findings. Clear? So see this. The same thing which I'm showing you here, you will find on the peripheral smear also. Can you see this beautiful peripheral smear? That is what I was telling you. This is the third point. Can you see? This was B. This was the C. So now you can see the beautiful correlation. Molecular mechanism, clinical finding, clumps, ischemia, Raynaud's phenomena, and from peripheral peripheral smear finding? What is the peripheral smear finding you can see here? What is the peripheral smear finding you can see here? Can you see? These are all the RBC clumps. All the RBC clumps, right? So we are seeing all the RBC clumps, right? So by seeing all these things, what do you think of? This is made up of IgM antibody, agglutinin, right? So now understood this is the IgM agglutinin. What is this? This is the IgM agglutinin. So that is how you are going to see this. This was the AIMS question also, right? This was the AIMS question 2 years back. Question was like this only, right? A patient was suffering from the mycoplasma infection because it is seen in mycoplasma, syphilis, viral infections like HIV. So all these infections can cause. So in AIMS examiner had used the name mycoplasma. A patient was having mycoplasma infection. Whenever he was exposed to the cold, he is developing redness, pallor, and all these things. So most likely, and peripheral smear was prepared like the same peripheral smear. But I'm showing you, same peripheral smear was given in exam, and examiner had asked this pathology is because of which antibody. So I understood that is how question will be asking in exam. So everybody understood this or not? IgM is agglutinating, forming the clumps. Molecular mechanism. Clinical finding. Clumps are going to obstruct the blood flow, ischemia. RBC clumps, ischemia, Raynaud's filament. And when you are taking out the blood sample, then also you are seeing the clumps on the peripheral smear. So these RBC clumps are all because of IgM, cold agglutinin antibody associated with mycoplasma, syphilis, and viral infection. Clear? So that is the agglutinin. That is the agglutinin. Now come to the hemolysin. What will happen in hemolysin? When we are going to see the hemolysin or causing the damage. So in this situation, here you can see IgG antibody. IgG antibodies are formed against which antigen? P antigen. Can you see? IgM was formed against I antigen. So RBC is having two antigen. RBC is having two important antigen for the immunohemolytic anemia. For IgM antibody, I antigen. For IgG antibody, P antigen. Right? Clear? So IgM antibody, I antigen. And in PCH, for IgG antibody, it is P antigen. So what is the difference? When this IgG is formed against P antigen, this will activate the complement pathway. Complement pathway activation. So can you see this? Complement pathway activation will be forming membrane attack complex. Right? Membrane attack complex will be formed. And what they are going to do? Membrane attack complex is going to do the lysis of this RBC. So can you notice? Lysis. Name is lysine. Lysis, lysine. Hemolysin is IgG antibody because IgG antibody, when they will attach to the P antigen of the RBC, they will activate the complement pathway. Membrane attack complex will be formed, and this membrane attack complex is going to cause hemolysis of the RBC. That is why there is a hemolysis. Right? That is why they are going to cause hemolysis. Right? So is it clear? So IgG antibody is hemolysin, and they will be causing RBC lysis. Clear? So that is the PCH. And PCH is most commonly associated with viral infection. It is about PCH. The PCH is most commonly associated with the viral infection. So this is also one important line I have seen in the Winthrop. This is the line of Winthrop. That is why I wanted to tell. Because such questions examiner can ask in especially the AIMS exam. Viral infections are most commonly associated, right? Virus, I have not read which virus, so I'm not very sure about that virus. Just they have written virus infection. So I don't have idea, so I will not commit anything. So otherwise you'll be having mistake. They'll not be asking which virus, right? They'll be just asking which infection they are commonly associated. I will search for virus also. Post in my Telegram group, right? So I think it is done. So immunohemolytic anemia is done. What is remaining? How you are going to confirm? How you are going to confirm immune hemolytic anemia? So immune hemolytic anemia can be confirmed by Coombs test, right? So Coombs test is used for confirmation of autoimmune hemolytic anemia diagnosis. Right? So now understood. So autoimmune hemolytic anemia will be confirmed by Coombs test. So this will confirm the diagnosis of autoimmune hemolytic anemia. Right? That Coombs tests are of two types, direct and indirect. That is again a very, very important question. Right? That is again a very, very important question. So Coombs test is direct and indirect. Coombs test, there are two types, direct, indirect. Clear? What is the feeling? Why this one is direct? Now you can see the RBC. RBC is having antibody. So when you are identifying antibody directly on the surface of RBC, so identification of antibody directly on the surface of RBC is called direct. And when you are finding antibody in the serum indirectly, can you see that? Indirect test, right? So now you understood that is how question will be asked. When you are finding antibody, in direct Coombs test, antibodies are present on RBC surface, right? So that is the important thing you have to remember. Indirect Coombs test, antibodies are present in the serum. Clear? So that is how question I have been asking in DMB 2015, right? So that is why I wanted to tell you. Direct on the surface of RBC, indirectly in the serum. Clear? Right. So now tell me, for autoimmune hemolytic anemia, which of the following is diagnostic? Direct one or indirect one? Very good. So can you see this? What I have shown you here in the picture? All the antibodies will be deposited on surface, right? So this will be direct Coombs test. So direct Coombs test is usually used for autoimmune hemolytic anemia, number one. Right? Also used for ITP. Remember immunogenic thrombocytopenic purpura? That immunogenic thrombocytopenic and non-immunogenic. So immunogenic will be positive. Third one is the hemolytic disease of the newborn. Hemolytic disease of the newborn. So hemolytic disease of the newborn. This is the direct Coombs test, right? So I will just tell you one more important thing. Here you have to be very careful. Because in hemolytic disease of the newborn, examiner can twist two types of question. Right? If examiner says the sample was taken from the mother and sent to the blood bank. See the question. Question is, hemolytic disease of the newborn was detected or found in the lab, in the record. Blood sample was collected from the mother, sent to the blood bank. Which investigation you will do first? Direct or indirect? Mother sample. Very good. Because it is maternal serum which is having antibody. Because it is the maternal serum. So whenever the examiner says hemolytic disease of the newborn and blood sample is from the mother, so it is maternal serum which is having antibodies. Right? But remember, just one thing you have to remember, that what we do commonly, the common thing is common. Commonly we are taking the sample from the bacha, right? Pediatric blood. Commonly we send the pediatric blood sample, right? So if nothing is written, you have to understand pediatric blood has been sent, so that is why direct Coombs test. But when examiner is writing purposefully, mother sample was sent in a suspected hemolytic disease of the newborn, which investigation you will do? Answer will be indirect Coombs test. Clear? Right. Another important example of the direct Coombs test is whenever there is a mismatched transfusion reaction. Or in simple word, whenever there is a transfusion reaction. Because transfusion reaction, you are sending the blood sample from the patient, right? Patient is having problem. Why? Because of the donor's antibody. Where you will find them on the patient's RBC. That's understood. So in transfusion reaction, in mismatched transfusion reaction, you will find patient RBC because patient RBC is having donor antibody. Why Coombs is positive in ITP? What is ITP? Arga, can you tell me what is the full form of ITP? Immunogenic thrombocytopenic purpura, right? So in ITP is immunogenic thrombocytopenic purpura because here IgG antibodies are against the platelet. Right? IgG antibodies are formed against the platelet, and IgG antibodies are formed against the RBC, and that is why they will be positive. That is why they will be positive for direct Coombs test. Right? Direct Coombs test is try to understand. Direct Coombs test, we are not checking the platelet only. Please do not restrict to that thing that we are taking out the platelet minute. No, the same antibody will be damaging the immunity disorder. There will be present on the RBC surface also. That is how we identify that IgG is active against the platelet. Clear? Clear, Agasa? Is it clear? Okay. So in direct Coombs test, now you understood patient RBC is having donor antibody. So donor antibody we have to identify. Right? So antibody present on the RBC. Patient blood sample has been sent in the transfusion reaction. Patient blood sample has been sent in the transfusion reaction. That is why direct Coombs test will be used here. Right? Indirect Coombs test, where you will do? Indirect Coombs test we do in the cross matching. When we are doing cross matching, some problem is there. Then, and in case of the rare blood groups, which rare blood group? Any rare blood group you know, which we have discussed just few days back. Bombay blood group, very good. What is the antibody? Anti-H antibody, remember? So that is what I said. Rare blood group, right? So unexpected antibodies, unexpected, because we are not expecting unexpected antibody. So that the technician will be coming to you. He will be telling us that sir, there is a sample has come, which is anti-A also positive, anti-B is also positive. There is one more antibody which is coming, unnecessary antibody is coming. Coombs test, right? So that is how we will identify that this is the unexpected antibody, and definitely it is a rare blood group, right? So I understood that is the significance of the indirect Coombs test, right? So is it clear? So now I think immunohemolytic anemia is clear to all of you. Very important and very good. And I think time is over, but what to do? Okay, just few more minutes, right? Few more minutes. Anti-H, yes, that is the anti-H antibody. Unexpected is anti-H. And anti-A is expected, right? Anti-H, anti-M, anti-N, all those rare blood groups, the fecally, all these are rare blood groups, right? So before we move to the means we stop, I will just tell you a few basic things, right? That I will start anemias, these hemoglobin disorders in the next session. But here I want to give you one basic introduction about the hemoglobin synthesis, right? So this ontogeny means hemoglobin formation is very, very important. There was a question in the AIIMS exam, and this was the question in the AIIMS exam. 2014, older question, right? So what is the ontogeny? Ontogeny means development of hemoglobin. So first hemoglobin is embryonic hemoglobin. Embryonic hemoglobin is present up to 8 weeks intrauterine life. That was the question in the ENV and PGI 2015. Remember, this is the word from the Winthrop, so there is no deviation from here. Please remember, because some guidebooks are writing 12 weeks and some so please forget everything. Just remember 8 weeks from the Winthrop. Embryonic hemoglobin is up to 8 weeks. Embryonic hemoglobin is up to 8 weeks. You can see the E looks like 8. E looks like 8. E 8. Right? So embryonic up to 8 weeks. Right? So what are the developmental episodes? First there will be cover 1, cover 1, cover. So there are 2 cover embryonic hemoglobin. Cover 1, cover 2. Then 2 Portland hemoglobin. 2 Portland. 2 embryonic, 2 Portland. Cover will be coming first. Cover 1, cover 2. Portland, Portland 1, Portland 2. Clear? Right? Now there will be all we know that hemoglobin is the 2 chains and all are paired. So here also we can see all are paired. Can you see all these are paired hemoglobin chains, right? So what is this chain? Can you tell me? What is this? Looks like jalebi. What is this? Jalebi like structure. So this is called zeta chain. Remember, this is called zeta. So this symbol is for zeta and this E is for epsilon. Right? So that was the question in the AIIMS exam. This was the question in the AIIMS exam. Question was zeta 2 epsilon 2 is embryonic hemoglobin. That's a simple question. Question was which of the following is embryonic hemoglobin? So zeta 2 epsilon 2 is embryonic hemoglobin. So what my prediction is, now examiner is going to ask you what is zeta 2 epsilon 2. So now answer will be cover 1. Right? So that is how we can expect. Or they can show you the symbol. That is why I am showing you the symbol. Jalebi like zeta, E like epsilon. This is symbol, you all know that. Alpha, epsilon, zeta, gamma, zeta, beta. Right? So now I understood the symbol. So cover 1 is zeta 2 epsilon 2 and cover 2. These are embryonic names on the name of based on the person's name who have discovered probably. Right? Maybe the person, maybe the university also. You never know that. Right? So cover 1, cover 2. These are all embryonic hemoglobin. What I told you. Embryonic hemoglobin are of 4 types. First is the cover 1, cover 2, Portland 1, Portland 2. Right? Cover 1 is having zeta 2 epsilon 2. Cover 2 is alpha 2 epsilon 2. Cover इसके बाद क्या है? Portland 1 is the zeta 2 and gamma 2. Portland is zeta 2 gamma 2. Remember zeta gamma both are paired. Zeta gamma 2 and Portland 2 is zeta 2 and beta 2. So just remember that gamma beta like that we can remember. Zeta is common. So gamma beta GB. Right, like that. Portland 1 is gamma 2. Portland 2 is beta. Clear? So you understood? It's based on the person's name. Right? Right? So after that there will be formation of the fetal hemoglobin. So when fetal hemoglobin will be formed? After 8 weeks of intrauterine life. See that embryonic hemoglobin up to 8 weeks. Fetal hemoglobin after 8 weeks of intrauterine life. So what is fetal hemoglobin consists of? Alpha 2 and gamma 2. Right? That is very important question. Fetal hemoglobin consists of alpha chain and gamma chain. Alpha 2, gamma 2. Alpha gamma is called fetal. Right? When tomorrow we will be discussing, that time I will be telling you about adult hemoglobin, because that is very important, right? This adult hemoglobin level you have to remember. In any adult hemoglobin, what is the composition? What is the composition of the adult hemoglobin? So HbA is the alpha 2 beta 2. Remember, adult hemoglobin is alpha 2 beta 2. This is the adult hemoglobin. How much? 96%. What is fetal hemoglobin? Alpha 2 gamma 2. Remember, alpha 2 gamma 2. So fetal hemoglobin is less than 2.5%. And HbA2. What is HbA2? HbA2 is minor hemoglobin alpha 2 beta 2, which will be less than 3.5%. Clear? So these are the very important things you have to remember, right? You have to remember about adult hemoglobin concentration. HbA is 96, fetal hemoglobin is less than 2.5%, HbA2 is alpha 2 beta 2, which is minor hemoglobin less than 3.5%. It will be useful for diagnosis of the thalassemia. So when we will discuss about the thalassemia, then we will be understanding. Right? So I think rest of the things we will discuss tomorrow, right? Fine. So tomorrow is Sunday, day after tomorrow we will be discussing, right? So we will be discussing about hemoglobin disorders and other anemias. Clear? Fine. So any other doubt you want to ask me? Prashant, Shubham, any other doubt? No doubt? Okay. Thank you so much. So keep revising all these things, and these are very, very, I'm telling you, these are one of the, in my opinion, I'm telling you, one of the very fine lectures which I'm giving you, because I'm covering so many things, and I can assure you there will be nothing beyond this in your exam. You can cover up more than, I'm telling you, when you are going to write your All India exam, or AIIMS exam, from AIIMS exam I can tell you more than 20 questions will be from these books. And All India you will definitely get more than 40 questions, take my word. All India you will definitely get more than 40 questions. If you are writing this All India exam, some of you can take my word, you will be getting questions like this only, when you will be combining it, I think. INICT, don't worry about that. Always remember only one thing, concept is the important. You just know the concept, that's all. Right? Concept you have to understand, that's all. Don't worry about anything. Don't worry about anything. You just focus on the concept, because nobody can say that what AIIMS people are going to frame, because this INICET, that that this exam is going to be conducted by AIIMS people, right? So they are going to frame the question paper. Maybe the collaboration with the other university will be asking, give me question, but there is one prophecy that the Chipper exam is a very toxic exam. Right? JIPA exam is a very toxic exam. They can ask single liner, they can ask very big question. But AIMS people are at least predictive. They'll be asking conceptual question. So in that way, it is very good. Second thing, see, I'm just telling you one important thing. Psychological stress is very more when you're writing so many exams before you need PG exam. First you're writing AIMS exam, you are hurt. Right? If you're not getting selection, right? And then you're writing PG again hurt, and then you're writing JIPA again hurt, and then you will be having NEET exam. Until that time, majority of the people are so wounded that they are not performing well. But one exam will be like this, so it will be good. And number of seats will be also good. There will be less wastage because some students will be getting first rank in the PGI, AIMS, JIPA all. So they will be wasting one seat. They will be taking radio there also, radio here also. So it will be very chaotic. And to come to the campus, you have to wait for 3-4 months. So it is one sense I'm telling you it is a very good thing. I don't know whether government is going to follow this for a long time or only for this year due to the pandemic. I don't know. But I feel like this will be for a long time because in undergraduate also they are making one exam only. That is good thing I'm telling you. Accept it. I'm telling you it is a good thing. Maybe your paper may be tough or easy, I cannot say. But you expect a tough question because AIMS people, they are notorious people. Right? So just remember, they are notorious people. They will definitely frame the tough question. There will be clinical question. There will be multiple options based question. There will be true false type of question. That kind of question will be there. UPSC medical exam actually I do not have. UPSC paper is very easy. It's not tough question. Don't worry. But it's a good exam. UPSC is different now. UPSC medical exam if you're writing from. I think you're talking about UPSC of ISPCS category or you are asking about the UPSC of the medical combined services. Medical combined services easy on ISPCS I have no idea. But they also don't ask very tough. Medical is okay. They will be having wider question paper. They will be having session wise, one session, second session. First session will be pre-clinical, paraclinical, second session will be the clinical one. Salary, I don't know government salary, but it's good salary, it's good salary. There's so much of good, they have good, because my brother is in railway and he used to tell that all the medical officers are having luxurious life, right? So salary is good only. I don't know exact amount, but definitely it is more than 1L. Definitely it is more than 1L, and you'll be having other, perks also. You'll be having so much of benefit. So much of benefit in the medical services. See, everywhere there is a pros and cons. Private practice, you can earn more, right? But private practice is now, it's going downside in this pandemic because nobody is coming to show them very very frequently as previously it was, right? So that is another very important thing. Private practice, you are working in the private hospital, they are like a corporate. Anytime they can remove you. Government, you will be like they'll not remove you. They will just transfer you from one place to another place, right? Yeah, you can do UPSC also. You can write all kind of exams. You can write IS exam, you can write IM business exam also. You can write. You're undergraduate. Now your graduation degree is there, so you can write IS exam. Many students I've seen in the they will be writing IS exam. They will writing IS exam. They have cleared IS exam. So you can even Roman Sanis has cleared, who is the owner here in the academy. He was the topper in the UPSC exam. You can have guidance from him. He is teaching in UPSC. MBBS कोई भी कर रहा है आजकल. हाँ ये तो है, बट कोई नहीं यार बोले तो उससे क्या होता है. देखो करने से कुछ नहीं होता है. MBBS कोई भी कर रहा है कि बहुत सारे लोग इधर उधर करते हैं, बट एक्सेल कितने लोग करते हैं. एक्सेल सारे लोग नहीं करते हैं. तो कोई भी कर रहा है, बहुत सारे लोग MBBS करने वाले, बट देयर आर वेरी पीपल विल बी वेरी गुड डॉक्टर. और कैसा है कि डॉक्टर्स का डिमांड फिर से वापस आएगा. ऐसा नहीं है कि दिस सिनेरियो विल नॉट बी गोइंग राइट. So don't worry, this profession will you'll always have a good life. See, this is the only profession. Even I feel like sometimes I feel hurt when they hit doctor and all right. Yeah, that's right. Sometimes क्या होता है ना, हम लोग को लगता है कि यार क्या कर लिया हम लोगों ने. लेकिन फिर मैं ये सोचता हूँ मैं इसके अलावा क्या और करता है. बताओ ना क्या करता है जिससे बढ़िया होता. कुछ नहीं था. मैं बोलूँगा तो वहाँ तो और गालियाँ गलत काम है. कितना झूठ बोलना है वहाँ पे. मतलब I cannot lie like that, right? I'm not saying that they're all liars. I'm just telling you. I have seen it. Majority of them like that only. If I do any, so I like engineering, right? I like engineering. You ask me if what else you want to become after this, I will say that I want to become IITM. If IITM में मेरा section, I will be happy. फिर बाकी सारा वैसे IS में क्या है, एक नेता होगा, वो तुमको रूल कर रहा होगा, वो तुमसे कम पढ़ा लिखा होगा, and then you will be feeling bad about it, right? So this is my opinion. I'm not saying कि this is good or this is bad. This is my opinion. I feel like this our profession is very good, very modest. We have everything. We have respect. आज भी सोसाइटी में जाओगे तो देखो ना मैरिज होती है, कहीं जाते हो तो तुम्हें लोग सबसे बहुत सारे लोग होते हैं, बहुत सारे जॉब के लोग होते हैं, but you become so prominent, right? डॉक्टर साहब आगे आधे लोग कुछ नहीं मेरे दर्द हो रहा है, हाथ में सर में दर्द हो रहा है, but you will be having a center of attraction. You will be always respectable. अब ये बात हमारे हाथ में है कि वो respect को कितना कैरी करते हैं. अब तुम पैमाने करने जाओगे, जबरदस्ती अपनी सेटिंग करोगे प्रिंटर पे, तो फिर काम खराब होगा. लेकिन अगर तुम अपना काम ईमानदारी से करोगे, तो I think you will having good name. और आज भी छोटे-छोटे शहरों में यार मेरे गाँव गाँव छोटा है, वहाँ पे तो बहुत रिस्पेक्ट है. यहाँ पे मुझे लोग मसीहा समझ लेते हैं. सोचना पड़ता है 2 बार के लिए वहाँ पे जाने से पहले. चुपचाप वहाँ बैठना पड़ता है, किसी से बोलना नहीं पड़ता है, बोलता है भगवान आया. तो ऐसा भी होता है, राइट? तो ऐसा भी होता है. दैट इज आल्सो वेरी देखो मेजर सिटीज में दिल्ली में कुछ पूछेगा नहीं. दिल्ली में यू आर जस्ट एन ऑर्डिनरी अंडरग्रेजुएट. लेकिन इन एरियाज वेयर पीपल एक्चुअली दे नीड यू, लाइक मोरिटा में जाओ, यूपी में जाओ, बिहार में जाओ, आज रिस्पेक्ट है, बहुत रिस्पेक्ट है. ले लो यार, मेडिसिन इज अ गुड ब्रांच. ऑल क्लिनिकल ब्रांचेस, आई कैन अश्योर यू, ऑल क्लिनिकल ब्रांचेस. थैंक यू सो मच. सो फिर मिलते हैं हम लोग, राइट? ग्रेट, बाय बाय.